Welcome to African Folktales by Tammy. Please don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe for more interesting stories. Also share this story to someone who might be interested. Let's get into the story. Obafemi Akande, a man of ambition and charm, was the pride of Aragon City. A self-made mogul in the bustling metropolis, he built his empire by outsmarting anyone who dared challenge him. To outsiders, his life was perfect. A beautiful mansion in Orodale Heights, influential friends, and his wife Aderayo, who seemed the ideal companion, quiet, dutiful, and unassuming. But Obafemi wasn't content. He wanted more control, wealth, and above all, respect. His latest obsession was the Agbeloba estate, a sprawling expanse of farmland rumored to be sitting atop vast untapped resources. However, the estate was tied up in a web of legal complications, the biggest being that Aderayo's ancestral lands were crucial for the deal to proceed. Obafemi prided himself on being a man who could manipulate anyone, including his wife. Aderayo, he believed, was naive and too trusting to question his motives. His plan was simple: convince her to sign over her lands under the guise of a family business investment, secure the estate, and sell it off to international investors for an astronomical profit. One evening, Obafemi set the stage. Over a luxurious dinner in their grand dining room, he softened his tone. "My love, there's an opportunity to expand our family's legacy. It's a small investment, but it will mean so much for generations to come." Aderayo raised her eyes from her plate, her expression unreadable. "You want me to sign something, don't you?" He smiled, feigning surprise. "Only if you trust me." She nodded, her tone soft. "Of course I trust you." Later that night, Obafemi handed her the documents, his heart racing with anticipation. He watched as she skimmed the pages, her pen poised. "You've always been the visionary," she said, signing her name. "I'll follow wherever you lead." Obafemi felt a rush of victory. "You won't regret this, Aderayo." But as she handed him the papers, her fingers lingered on them for a moment longer than necessary. Her eyes met his, and for a fleeting moment Obafemi felt something he hadn't in years: uncertainty. As he walked away with the signed documents, Aderayo retreated to her room. Alone, she pulled out a second set of papers from her desk drawer, the originals. What Obafemi held in his hands were carefully forged duplicates. In her quiet solitude, she whispered, "Let the game begin." Unbeknownst to Obafemi, the perfect trap had been set, not by him, but by the wife he so underestimated. The morning after Aderayo signed the papers, Obafemi woke up with a triumphant smile. He could already envision the Agbeloba estate deal closing, the wealth it would bring, and the power it would cement in his name. As he enjoyed his breakfast in their sprawling home in Orodale Heights, he barely noticed Aderayo sipping her tea in silence. She was always the quiet one, the one who melted into the background. "Darling," he said, setting down his coffee, "I have some errands to run today. I'll be meeting with Chief Agbodun to finalize a deal that will change everything for us." Aderayo nodded, her face serene. "That sounds wonderful. I trust you know what's best for us." He smiled, leaning over to kiss her forehead before leaving. He didn't notice the faint smirk that flickered across her lips as the door shut behind him. Obafemi arrived at the grand office of Chief Agbodun, a formidable man known for his business acumen. The chief was waiting for him, a glass of palm wine in hand. "Obafemi," he greeted with a booming voice, "I trust you've secured what we discussed." "With ease," Obafemi replied confidently, handing over the forged documents. "My wife signed them last night." Chief Agbodun studied the papers, his sharp eyes scanning the pages. "Good, very good. I'll have my lawyers cross-check these and we'll move forward. Expect a formal agreement by the end of the week." Satisfied, Obafemi left the meeting, eager to celebrate his inevitable success. But back in Aragon City, things were far from what they seemed. Unknown to Obafemi, Aderayo had spent the morning at the offices of Alara Legal Consultancy, one of the most prestigious law firms in Orodale Heights. There she met with Barrister Olumaide, a sharp and calculating attorney she had secretly retained months ago. "Everything is in place," Aderayo said, sliding the original title deeds across the polished mahogany desk. "The duplicate copies my husband handed over will not hold up under scrutiny." Olumide nodded, his expression one of admiration. "You've thought of everything, Mrs. Akande." Once the fraud is exposed, you'll have full legal control of your inheritance and your husband's deal. Will crumble, she finished, her voice steady. By noon, word began to spread through the elite circles of Aragon City. The whispers were subtle but unmistakable. Someone was quietly consolidating power behind Obafemi's back. At home that evening, Obafemi returned, his confidence brimming. He barely noticed Aderayo as he poured himself a drink. "To the future," he said aloud. Aderayo glanced up from her book, her face calm. "Indeed," she replied, her voice carrying a hint of something he couldn't place, something that made the hairs on his neck stand on end. As Obafemi slept soundly that night, oblivious to the storm brewing around him, Aderayo lay awake, staring at the ceiling. Her mind raced with the calculated moves she had yet to play. For Obafemi, the game had only just begun, but for Aderayo, it was already checkmate. Obafemi woke up to an uneasy feeling that morning, though he couldn't quite place why. The birds chirped outside their sprawling Orodel Heights mansion, and the scent of freshly brewed coffee wafted from the kitchen. Everything seemed normal, yet something felt off. As he made his way downstairs, he noticed Aderayo humming softly, preparing his favorite breakfast of yam porridge and fried plantains. Her composure irritated him slightly. She was too calm, too collected. His instincts, honed over years of manipulation and business dealings, prickled with unease. "Good morning," he said, masking his suspicions with a warm smile. "Good morning, darling," she replied, placing the steaming bowl in front of him. "You're up early today? Big plans?" Obafemi hesitated, gauging her expression. "Just some follow-ups with Chief Agbodun, nothing serious." Her smile was flawless, her tone soothing. "I'm sure everything will go smoothly. You've worked so hard." He ate in silence, her words lingering in his mind. Aderayo had always been supportive, but something about the way she said it felt different, almost deliberate. Late that day, Obafemi visited his most trusted ally, Deoloo, a cunning real estate broker who had helped him orchestrate several underhanded deals in the past. In De's cramped but efficient office in the bustling Okanun district, they reviewed the Agbeloba estate transaction. "All we need now is for Chief Agbodun's lawyers to confirm the documents and the deal is sealed," De said, a sly grin on his face. Obafemi nodded, though his mind was elsewhere. "De," he began cautiously, "have you ever felt like someone was watching your every move?" De raised an eyebrow. "Paranoia doesn't suit you, Femi. You're the one holding all the cards." Obafemi chuckled, shaking his head. "You're right, it's probably nothing." But as he left Okanrun and drove back to Ordale Heights, the unease only grew. He couldn't shake the feeling that something was slipping out of his control. When he arrived home, Aderayo was in the garden, trimming the hibiscus bushes. She looked up as he approached, her face serene. "You're home early," she said. "I wanted to spend some time with you," he lied, watching her carefully. She smiled, wiping her hands on her apron. "That's sweet of you. Shall we have tea in the garden?" As they sat together sipping tea, Obafemi felt a rare vulnerability. "You've been so good to me, Aderayo. I hope you know how much I value you." Her eyes met his, and for a moment he thought he saw something flicker in them, a sharpness he hadn't noticed before. "I've always believed in loyalty," she said softly. "It's the foundation of any strong partnership, don't you think?" Her words felt like a challenge, though her tone was gentle. Obafemi smiled, but his heart raced. That night, as he reviewed his financial records, he noticed something troubling, small, untraceable withdrawals from their joint account. They were insignificant individually, but together formed a troubling pattern. Obafemi's mind raced. Someone was moving against him. In the silence of his study, the shadows seemed to close in. He stared at the ledger, his pulse pounding. Could it be Aderayo? He shook the thought away. "No," he muttered, "she's not that clever." But as he turned off the light and headed to bed, the unease followed him. Aderayo was already asleep, her face peaceful. Yet Obafemi couldn't help but feel as though he was lying next to a stranger. The game had begun to shift, and for the first time in his life, Obafemi wasn't sure who was winning. The morning air in Orodale Heights was crisp, yet a storm brewed within Obafemi Akande. Sleep had eluded him, haunted by the irregularities in his finances. Though small, the discrepancies gnawed at him. Someone was tampering with his life, pulling strings where he thought he held all the control. After breakfast, Obafemi excused himself to his study, claiming he had urgent calls to make. As soon as he shut the door, he dialed Dare Oloho. The line crackled before Dare's voice came through, jovial as always. "Femi, what's eating you this early?" "There's a problem," Obafemi muttered, pacing the length of the room. "I've been noticing strange activity in my accounts. I think someone is trying to sabotage me." Dare chuckled, brushing it off. "Who'd dare cross you? You're paranoid." "Probably just an accounting error." Obafemi's grip on the phone tightened. "It's not an error, and what if?" He hesitated, the thought too unsettling to say aloud. "What if what?" Dare pressed. "What if it's Aderayo?" The silence on the other end was deafening before Dare burst into laughter. "Your wife, Aderayo, the docile housewife? Come on, Femi. That woman wouldn't even know how to open a business ledger, let alone pull off sabotage." Obafemi forced a laugh, but the knot in his stomach tightened. "You're probably right," he said, ending the call. But he wasn't convinced. Determined to uncover the truth, Obafemi drove into the heart of Arogun City, where his private investigator, Adebanjo Akogun, ran his operations. Adebanjo was a wiry man with sharp eyes that missed nothing. "Adebanjo, I need you to keep an eye on someone," Obafemi began, lowering his voice. "My wife?" Adebanjo raised an eyebrow, but said nothing, simply jotting down notes. "I want to know where she goes, who she meets, what she's up to." "No detail is too small," Obafemi continued. Adebanjo nodded. "Consider it done." Later that evening, Obafemi returned home, feigning normalcy. Aderayo greeted him with her usual calm demeanor, her smile soft and disarming. "I made dinner reservations at Tiwaladi's bistro," she said, her voice warm. "I thought we could spend some quality time together." Caught off guard, Obafemi hesitated, but agreed. At the bistro, Aderayo seemed her usual self, warm, attentive, and doting. Yet, as the evening progressed, her subtle comments unsettled him. "You've been so distracted lately," she said, her tone light but probing. "Work troubles, nothing I can't handle," he replied, masking his unease. Her smile didn't waver. "I'm sure you'll figure it out, you always do." Obafemi barely tasted his food, his mind racing. Her calmness felt calculated, as though she were silently mocking him. When they returned home, Obafemi retreated to his study, where Adebanjo's first report awaited him in an encrypted email. He opened it with trembling hands. The report was brief but damning. Aderayo had visited Alara Legal Consultancy, transferred funds to a personal account, and met with Barrister Olumide, a name Obafemi recognized as one of the sharpest legal minds in the city. His heart pounded as he read the final line. "Client appears to be consolidating assets and preparing for a significant legal maneuver." Obafemi stared at the screen, his chest tightening. The woman he had underestimated for years wasn't just playing along, she was outplaying him. But why? As the shadows deepened in his study, Obafemi realized he wasn't the master of this game. For the first time in his life, he was a pawn. Obafemi sat in the darkened study, the glowing laptop screen casting eerie shadows across his face. His heart pounded as he read the investigator's report again. Each word felt like a betrayal, a dagger slowly twisting in his gut. Aderayo, his quiet, obedient wife, was scheming behind his back. The realization left him breathless. He slammed the laptop shut and paced the room, his thoughts racing. Could the report be wrong? Was Adebanjo mistaken? But deep down, Obafemi knew the truth. Aderayo had been playing him. The question was, for how long? Morning arrived, but Obafemi barely noticed. He skipped breakfast and drove straight to Dare's office. His trusted eye was lounging in his chair, a mug of coffee in hand. "You look like you've seen a ghost," Dare said, his grin fading when he saw Obafemi's grim expression. "What's wrong?" "It's Aderayo," Obafemi said, dropping into the chair opposite Dare. "She's been meeting with lawyers, moving money, and—" he broke off, running a hand over his face. Dare leaned forward, his voice low. "Are you sure? This doesn't sound like her." "I'm sure," Obafemi snapped, slamming the investigator's report onto the desk. "Read it yourself." Dare skimmed the document, his expression growing more serious with each line. When he finished, he leaned back in his chair. "This doesn't look good. What do I do?" Obafemi asked, his voice tight. "You've got to confront her," Dare said. "But don't let her know what you know. Draw her out." if she's really scheming against you, she'll slip. That evening, Obafemi returned home with a plan. Aderayo was in the living room, reading a novel, her face serene. "Long day?" she asked, her voice as calm as ever. "Very," he replied, forcing a smile. "But I've been thinking. We've been so focused on work and finances. We need a break, a trip maybe." Aderayo looked up, her brow furrowing slightly. "A trip where?" "Somewhere quiet," he said, sitting beside her. "Just the two of us. We could use the time to reconnect." Her lips curved into a smile, but her eyes held a glint of suspicion. "That sounds lovely," but Obafemi wasn't fooled. Her reaction wasn't one of excitement, it was calculation. She was trying to read him just as he was trying to read her. The next day, while Aderayo was out, Obafemi searched the house. He rifled through drawers, checked the safe, even sifted through her wardrobe. Finally, tucked in the back of a locked chest in the study, he found it, a file marked Ogunlewa Trust Fund. His hands trembled as he opened it. Inside were detailed records of their joint assets, including the farmland he thought he controlled. But to his horror, the documents showed that Aderayo had been funneling everything into her name. A cold sweat broke over him. The pieces fell into place, the legal meetings, the transfers, her quiet confidence. Aderayo wasn't just playing him, she was dismantling him. As he heard the front door open, Obafemi quickly replaced the file and locked the chest. He composed himself just as Aderayo entered the study. "Busy day?" she asked, her smile as serene as ever. Obafemi nodded, forcing a grin. Always, but inside his panic grew. Aderayo had turned the game against him and he was running out of moves. Obafemi couldn't sleep. The air in their lavish Orodila Heights mansion felt stifling, every shadow in the room twisting into a reflection of his turmoil. Aderayo slept beside him, her breathing steady and untroubled. How could she rest so peacefully while dismantling everything he'd built? At dawn he made his move. Quietly slipping out of bed, Obafemi returned to the study. He stared at the locked chest that had held Aderayo's secret files the day before. His instincts told him there had to be more. His mind raced as he picked the lock again. Inside the chest, beneath a folder marked Ogunlewa Trust Fund, he found another file labeled Okanbi Holdings. This one was worse, much worse. It detailed not only her financial maneuvers, but also partnerships with powerful individuals Obafemi considered rivals. Chief Agbodun's name was listed among them, along with cryptic notes about undisclosed compensations. Obafemi's heart raced as he pieced it together. Aderayo wasn't just protecting herself. She was preparing to cut him out entirely. Suddenly, he heard a soft creak behind him. He spun around to find Aderayo standing in the doorway, her silk robe glowing faintly in the dim light. Her face betrayed nothing but mild curiosity. "Couldn't sleep, darling?" she asked, her voice calm and measured. Obafemi fumbled to close the chest, forcing a smile. "Just some work I needed to review." "Work," she echoed, stepping into the room. She moved gracefully, her eyes sharp as they flicked to the chest. "You've been so busy lately. I worry about you." "I can handle it," he replied quickly. "You don't need to worry." She stopped a few feet from him, tilting her head slightly. "Of course, but you should know something, Obafemi." Her tone shifted, becoming colder, sharper. "I've always paid attention, even when you thought I wasn't." Obafemi froze, his hands tightening into fists. "What are you talking about?" Aderayo stepped closer, her expression unreadable. "You think I don't know about your deals behind my back? About the farmland you planned to sell without telling me? Or the debts you've been hiding?" His chest tightened. "I don't know what you're talking about." She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "You've underestimated me for years, Femi. But I know everything, and now it's my turn to play the game." Her words hit him like a slap. The controlled, docile wife he thought he knew had vanished, replaced by a woman who had calculated his every move. Before he could respond, she turned and walked away, leaving him alone in the study. Obafemi sat in stunned silence, the walls of his once perfect life closing in around him. That morning, as Aderayo prepared breakfast, her demeanor returned to its usual calm. She greeted him with a gentle smile, as though their conversation had never happened. Obafemi forced himself to smile back, but his mind churned. He had always been the hunter, the one who controlled the game. Now he realized he was the prey. But one thing was certain, He wasn't going down without a fight. Obafemi spent the next few days in a calculated silence, observing Aderayo with a mixture of fear and grudging admiration. Her ability to play the role of the doting wife while orchestrating his downfall was chilling. But Obafemi Akande was not a man to bow easily. If Aderayo wanted a war, he would give her one. He began by summoning Adebanjo Okogun, the private investigator, to his office in Okanbi district. Adebanjo arrived promptly, his sharp eyes scanning Obafemi's face. "What's the next move?" he asked, taking a seat. "Find out everything about her," Obafemi said, leaning forward. "I need leverage, something to put her back in line." "I don't care how far you have to dig." Adebanjo hesitated. "Are you sure about this, Femi? If she's as smart as you say, she's covered her tracks." "Everyone has a weakness," Obafemi snapped. "Find hers." Adebanjo nodded and left without another word. Alone, Obafemi began sifting through his own networks. He reached out to his old contacts, including shady financial brokers and political allies, hoping to uncover any skeletons in Aderayo's closet. Meanwhile, at home, Aderayo moved with her usual grace as though nothing had changed. She maintained her routines, attending charity luncheons, visiting friends, and overseeing household affairs. Yet every interaction with her felt like a veiled challenge. Obafemi could feel her watching him, waiting for his next move. His first strike came unexpectedly. During dinner one evening, he casually mentioned, "I've been thinking about our finances. We should consolidate some of our assets for security." Aderayo raised an eyebrow. "Oh, what brought this on?" "Just thinking about the future," he said smoothly. "I'll have my lawyers review the Ogunlewa properties tomorrow." Her fork froze midway to her mouth. It was only a split second, but Obafemi caught the flicker of surprise in her eyes before she masked it with a smile. "That's a good idea." The following morning, Obafemi sent his team of lawyers to the land registry office in Orodale Heights. He wanted to confirm ownership of the farmland, hoping to regain control. But by afternoon, the lead attorney called with troubling news. "Sir, the records show that the Ogunlewa lands were transferred into a private trust 6 months ago," the lawyer reported. "The trust is impenetrable. Your name isn't listed anywhere." Obafemi's blood ran cold. "Who controls the trust?" There was a pause before the lawyer answered, "Aderayo Akande." He slammed the phone down, rage boiling inside him. Aderayo had been planning this for months, maybe years. She wasn't just dismantling his empire, she was seizing it piece by piece. That evening, as they sat in the living room, Obafemi turned to her, his voice laced with venom. "What are you up to, Aderayo?" She looked up from her book, her expression calm. "I don't know what you mean." "Don't play coy with me," he snapped. "The trust, the money transfers, the lawyers. What's your endgame?" She closed her book and met his gaze, her eyes steely. "My endgame, Obafemi, survival." Her words sent a chill down his spine. For the first time, he realized he might be up against someone he couldn't outmaneuver. But Obafemi was not a man who gave up easily. If Aderayo thought she had won, she was mistaken. He would strike back with everything he had, no matter the cost. Obafemi sat in his private office in Okanbi district, his mind racing. The revelation about the trust was like a vice around his chest. How had Aderayo, the woman he had dismissed for years as docile and submissive, outplayed him so thoroughly? The pieces of her plan were coming into focus, and it terrified him. Desperation was a dangerous thing, and Obafemi was drowning in it. He leaned back in his chair, staring at the ceiling as he plotted his next move. If he couldn't outmaneuver Aderayo in court or through legal channels, then he would have to play dirty, something he excelled at. He reached for his phone and called Dare Oloho. "I need you to do something for me," he said, his tone steely. "Anything," Dare replied without hesitation. "There's a lawyer, Olumide, from Alara Legal Consultancy. He's working with Aderayo. I want dirt on him. Find out his weaknesses. Blackmail, bribery, whatever it takes to make him turn on her." Dare chuckled. "Now that's the Obafemi I know. Consider it done." But as Obafemi planned his counterattack, Aderayo was making moves of her own. That afternoon, she met with Chief Agbodun at a discreet cafe in the outskirts of Orodale Heights. The chief, a man known for his ruthless pragmatism, studied her with newfound respect. "You've done well, Aderayo," he said, sipping his drink. "Most women wouldn't dare go against their husbands like this." Most women don't have husbands like Obafemi, she replied, her voice calm but resolute. He built his empire on manipulation and lies. It's only fitting that it all comes crashing down. Chief Agbodun chuckled. And what's your next move? I need your support, she said, sliding a file across the table. If Obafemi tries to retaliate, this will protect us both. The chief opened the file and scanned its contents. His expression shifted from amusement to surprise, then to admiration. You're smarter than I gave you credit for. That's what everyone says, she replied with a faint smile. Meanwhile, back in Okanbi district, Dare called Obafemi with an update. I found something on Olumide, he said. He's got a gambling problem. Owes money to some very dangerous people. Perfect, Obafemi said, his lips curling into a smile. Lean on him. Make sure he knows what's at stake if he doesn't cooperate. That evening, Obafemi returned home, his confidence restored. He greeted Aderayo with a warm smile, masking the storm brewing within him. How was your day? She asked, her tone as serene as ever. Productive, he replied, pouring himself a drink. And yours? Quite eventful, she said, setting down her book. I met with Chief Agbodun today. We had a very enlightening conversation. Obafemi froze, his drink halfway to his lips. Oh, about what? She smiled, her gaze unwavering. Business. The word hung in the air like a challenge. Obafemi's mind raced. How much did she know? How far ahead was she playing? As the night wore on, Obafemi sat alone in his study, staring at the file he had compiled on Aderayo. For years he had prided himself on being the puppet master. But now the strings were slipping from his grasp, and the woman he thought he controlled was proving to be a far more formidable opponent than he had ever imagined. Tomorrow, he thought, pouring himself another drink. Tomorrow, I'll turn this around. But deep down, he wasn't sure if he could. The next morning, Obafemi sat in his office staring at the clock as he waited for Dare's update. His desperation had reached a fever pitch. Everything depended on this final move. If Olumide could be forced to betray Aderayo, then her carefully laid plans would crumble. At exactly 11 a.m., his phone rang. It was Dare. I've got him, Dare said, his voice dripping with triumph. Olumide scared out of his mind. I told him his gambling debts would resurface in the wrong places if he didn't cooperate. He's ready to talk. Obafemi felt a rush of relief. Good, meet me in the usual spot with Olumide in an hour. At the dilapidated warehouse in the outskirts of Okanbi district, Obafemi met Dare and a visibly shaken Olumide. The lawyer was sweating profusely, his eyes darting around the room. You don't need to be afraid, Obafemi began, his voice calm but menacing. I only need one thing from you. Everything you know about Aderayo's plan. Olumi hesitated, his voice trembling. She's planning to freeze all your assets. She's been consolidating accounts, shifting them into the Ogunlewa Trust. Once the courts approve her filings, you'll be left with nothing. Obafemi's jaw clenched. And you're helping her do this? I didn't have a choice, Olumide blurted out. She's brilliant, ruthless even. She had every angle covered before she approached me. Obafemi's mind raced. He needed to act fast before Aderayo finalized her moves. You're going to undo everything, he said, leaning in closer. I don't care how you do it. Stall her filings, leak information to the courts, whatever it takes. Olumide nodded quickly, eager to escape Obafemi's wrath. Meanwhile, back at the Orodale Heights mansion, Aderayo was 3 steps ahead. She sat in her private study, going over the final documents with precision. Her phone buzzed and Chief Agbodun's name appeared on the screen. It's done, the chief said when she answered. The farmland is now under my company's name. Your husband won't even see it coming. Thank you, Aderayo replied, her voice steady. I'll handle the rest. By evening, Obafemi returned home, his confidence renewed. He had planted his countermeasures and was ready to confront Aderayo. But as he entered the living room, he found her waiting for him, a single folder resting on the coffee table. You've been busy, she said, her tone calm but icy. So have you, Obafemi replied, his eyes narrowing. She gestured to the folder. Go on. Open it. He hesitated but eventually complied. Inside was a detailed breakdown of his financial indiscretions, illegal deals, and mounting debts. His blood ran cold as he realized the extent of her knowledge. You thought you could manipulate me, she said, her voice soft but cutting. But I've been watching you for years, Obafemi. I've seen how you operate, how you lie and cheat to get what you want. Did you really think I wouldn't protect myself?" His mind reeled as he tried to formulate a response, but she cut him off. "The courts will receive this tomorrow," she said, gesturing to the folder. "Unless, of course, you agree to my terms." "What terms?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "You will sign over your shares in Okanbi Holdings to me. You will relinquish control of all joint accounts, and you will leave this house by the end of the week." Obafemi's rage boiled over. "You can't do this." "I already have," she replied, her eyes like steel. For the first time, Obafemi realized the truth. The game was over and Aderayo had won. Obafemi stared at the folder on the coffee table, his chest tightening as he realized the gravity of his situation. Aderayo's terms weren't a negotiation, they were an ultimatum. The woman he had dismissed for years as weak and submissive was now standing over the ruins of his empire, holding all the power. "You're bluffing," he said, his voice laced with defiance. "You wouldn't destroy me. You'd lose everything, too." Aderayo's smile was faint but chilling. "You underestimate me even now. I've spent years ensuring that I'll come out of this unscathed. The assets you think you control are already beyond your reach. I have nothing left to lose." Obafemi's mind raced. He had gambled everything, and somehow Aderayo had turned his own tactics against him. Desperate, he tried a different approach. "What happened to you, Aderayo? You were never like this." Her expression darkened. "You happened to me, Obafemi. For years I watched you manipulate, lie, and cheat your way to success. I stayed silent, thinking I could endure it. But when you tried to take my family's land, the only thing I have left of my heritage, I realized silence wasn't an option anymore." Her words hit him like a blow. He had underestimated her strength, her intelligence, and most of all, her resolve. "I can fight this," he said, though his voice faltered. "I have allies, connections." Her laugh was soft, almost pitying. "Your allies, Chief Agbodun, Dare Oloho, they've already abandoned you. Do you think I didn't account for them in my plans?" Obafemi felt his stomach drop. "What did you do?" "Chief Agbodun now holds full control of the farmland you so desperately wanted. As for Dare," she paused, letting the words sink in, "he's been feeding me information about your moves for weeks. Loyalty is a fragile thing, especially when money is involved." Rage coursed through him, but he forced himself to stay calm. "You think this is over? You'll never survive without me." She stepped closer, her voice cold and steady. "I've already survived. You're the one who can't handle losing control. That's why you're in this position." Obafemi's last shred of pride crumbled. He sank into the couch, staring at the woman who had outsmarted him at every turn. "What do you want from me?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "I want you to disappear," she said, her tone final. "Sign the papers, leave Orodell Heights, and never try to contact me again." For a long moment he didn't move. Then, with trembling hands, he reached for the pen she placed on the table. Defeated, he signed away his empire, his wealth, and his pride. As he left the house that night, carrying only a suitcase, he glanced back at the home he once ruled. Inside, Aderayo stood tall, a woman who had reclaimed her power and written her own ending. For the first time in his life, Obafemi realized what true strength looked like, and it wasn't his own. We've come to the end of this story. Please subscribe to my channel to support me. Thank you.